Hey guys, this is Troy with Hacker Warehouse TV. We are back at DEF CON 25, and we are here with Peyton, Foofus, Engle. You did a talk on secret tools, learning about government surveillance software that we can't ever see.
That's right. So the basic idea is this: a criminal case, and I'm simplifying here.
Okay.
A criminal case has sort of two main stages. We've got the investigation stage where they're gathering enough information to go and make an arrest, and then once you're arrested, then we're going to start the legal process.
Okay.
And in the investigation stage, what in this case the investigators are trying to do is they have to gather enough information so they can take it to a judge and say, Judge, we need a warrant to go and search these premises. And the standard there is they have to establish what's called probable cause, which is enough that a reasonable person might think, hey, a crime might be afoot here, and then the judge will sign off on it. So what they do is the tools are clients for peer-to-peer networks. They're based on existing clients that are accessible to anyone, like BitTorrent or Nutella or whatever.
Okay.
And because they're open source, the government has been able to take them and modify them and add some features that an ordinary user wouldn't be interested in, but an investigator might. And so they use these to find out who's trading what online, and then based on that, they'll gather enough of that stuff to show that it was really this person who was trading it, and then also gather that person's IP address. And based on the IP address, they'll issue a subpoena to an ISP. From there, they get the subscriber information. They can go to the judge and say, this is the house we want to search. We want to go in there and seize the computers. So we know about this because once the person is charged, you get to see the warrant that was issued and the affidavit that went with the warrant. And so they have to describe, well, on what basis are they, what's the reason they get to go search this house? And so they talk about these tools in kind of veiled ways. They tell a little bit about what they can do, and they describe how a peer-to-peer network works and so forth, but they never really give you the full Monty on it.
Yeah.
And so I think a very reasonable, logical question that a defendant might ask is, well, how the heck does this thing work? How do we know it's reliable? And the government keeps these tools secret, and that's basically what my talk was about. I've read enough of the search warrant affidavits that I can draw some inferences about how they work and what they do and what their capabilities are.
Okay, and what are some of the features that are modified? So if you take the original open source program, give us an example of some of the features.
One thing is just keeping logs of all the IP addresses it connects to. Okay. So that an ordinary user wouldn't care about that. An investigator really does care. Another one is, let's say we're talking about BitTorrent. The glory of BitTorrent, right, is that you're going to be able to download things relatively fast. And the way that's accomplished is the designers recognize that the bandwidth we purchase from our ISPs is asymmetrical. We can download things way faster than we can upload them. So if we're sharing, what we want to do is distribute the work of sharing a single large file across many different endpoints, so that the person who's downloading it can grab a piece from here and a piece from there and a piece from there, and they can get a nice aggregate download speed, even though any of the uploaders is still throttled by whatever their maximum upload speed is. So, where we're headed with that is the investigator can't just say, oh, this person has a piece of the file. They have to get the whole file from the target of their investigation, otherwise the person might not actually possess it.
Right.
So one of the features that's built into the BitTorrent version of this is a feature that allows them to get what they call a single source download, something that pulls the entire file from one node. And that frustrates the purpose of the BitTorrent protocol, but it's essential to investigation. And that's an example of a feature.
That's interesting. So if there's a single source download, then the investigator can say for sure they had that file.
They
on
had
the
whole and the whole file. Yeah.
Okay.
It was not just a piece of the file; it was the whole darn thing.
So overall, what was the outcome of your research? Was there something that happened because of your research afterwards?
No, not yet. I think if anything, there's more work to be done, but there's a couple of things that I was able to figure out, and I think I'm right, but of course, no one's really telling me. So there were two questions that I had. One is, so one of the features that the software has, or at least some versions of it, is the ability to tag a remote node, so that, I'm connected to you, and I'm going to put some piece of information on your computer so that later when I come and seize that computer, if that piece of information's there, that was the very computer that I was talking to.
I see.
And that's a kind of dicey area. There's a general rule, which is if I'm sharing something on the network, then it's fine. People can connect and grab it. If I'm not sharing something, you probably need a warrant to get access to it.
Okay.
And so this is all done pre-warrant. They haven't got a warrant when they're doing this. So what is this tagging going on? And that's kind of an interesting thing, because if they're invading a private spot on the computer, that's maybe a violation of the Fourth Amendment and a powerful tool for the defense then. And the result seems to be that when two clients connect to each other, at least on some platforms, there's a handshake that goes on, and they'll make a record of what systems they've talked to. And I think what's going on is, the record is usually of what's called a globally unique ID, or GUID.
Okay.
And I think what's going on is the law enforcement software is feeding something that isn't actually a GUID, but a little blob of encrypted information that they can later prove is theirs because they can decrypt it.
I see. Okay.
So that's one kind of interesting thing. Another one is, why does the government want to keep this secret? They say, oh, this is just, a slightly modified version of an open source program. There's nothing interesting to see here. You don't need to see this. It's not, it's not that big a deal. And, well, okay, if it's not that big a deal, why don't you just show it to me?
Okay.
So there are, I think, two reasons that they give, and I think one of them is disingenuous, and the other one is probably quite serious. So the first reason that they give is, well, this would compromise our database of known contraband files. So another of the features that they've got for themselves is they've got a large database of things that they know you're not supposed to have.
Okay.
And so when they connect to a client, you can quickly see what the hash values are of the things that are out there.
Sure.
And that soups up their ability to do this quickly and thoroughly and reliably. And so if their database of known contraband hashes got out, everyone would just flip one bit in the things that they're trying to trade, and the database would be worthless. However, that's a two-way street, because that's also how the peers identify the files to one another. So if everybody flipped one bit and not everybody agreed on which bit to flip worldwide, you'd break the peer-to-peer sharing, because you wouldn't know, the file that's on system A is the same as the file that's on system B. That's how we compare those things. So I don't think the hash value excuse is a really working one. Okay. The other one is, it would disclose our, they say it would disclose our undercover investigator. That's the language that they use when they're doing a drug investigation. They've got someone undercover in the cartel.
Okay.
And they don't want to burn that person's identity, and that's a very valid concern.
Sure.
Especially in that situation. Here, maybe a little less so, but what does that mean? So there's two possibilities. One is, and they both have to do with the idea that law enforcement doesn't want to inadvertently spend its time targeting other law enforcement. This software is in use by hundreds of investigative agencies nationwide and even abroad. And if they spent time connecting to one another, they'd just be wasting their time, and people kind of crossing paths in dumb ways, and so they don't want to do that. That's my theory anyway. And so one way that they could avoid doing that is if everybody who used the software would register what IP they're using it from, then we would know not to go and bother with those IPs.
Okay.
So that database would be a really big secret, and I get why that would want to be secret. However, I don't think that's part of the software itself. That's probably somewhere in some central location. Mm-hmm. But the software, if they showed us the software, we might be able to figure out where it is and how to query it, and then we could get that list.
I see.
So that's one possibility, is that there's a centralized repository of where the investigators are, and that's a legitimate secret. I get why you want to keep that secret.
Yeah.
The other one is that there's something in the way that the peers connect to one another that allows them to recognize one another and say, okay, we don't need to investigate this guy, he's one of us. Well, that would also be a really good, handy thing for people to have, because if you could recognize these things when they connected to you, you'd just hang up the connection and you wouldn't get investigated then. So I think that's probably the primary reason they don't want to share the tool. And the question then is, well, does that override a defendant's right to know whether the tool that's accusing him of a crime is reliable and accurate?
Yes.
And you can see court cases that go either way. There are a lot where law enforcement claims what they call the law enforcement privilege, which is this kind of qualified ability not to disclose certain information that would compromise investigative sources and means.
Like national security reasons or something.
Well, that would be the big strong one, yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's used in a similar way, but this is at the state and local level generally.
Okay.
And then a lot of courts will go along with that. but not all of them. And every so often you'll convince a judge, hey, state, put up or shut up. Let's, you got to see the tool. And I'm aware of cases where the state has dropped the charges then, because rather than disclose the tool, they would just say, okay,
really?
we're done here.
Is it possible that they would even give this source to an outside party to be verified under attorney-client privilege type
We have
situations?
proposed that sort of thing, and so far they have not done it. I don't know that they would never do it, but they have not. And that would be actually pretty satisfactory. So back in I think it was the early 2000s, there were a series of cases where people were being pulled over for driving under the influence of alcohol, and they would be given a breathalyzer test at the side of the road. And they started asking, well, how do we know the breathalyzer works reliably? Well, a breathalyzer was a thing that you could buy, and you could get that tested. But it wasn't, it took some doing to get access to the source code, but eventually people did, and found out that indeed there were bugs in it, and there were times when it might misbehave and might do things wrong. So one of the sort of cornerstone things that you want to know about a piece of evidence before you admit it in court is how reliable is it? And if it's a test, you want to know what is its false positive rate. Okay. So the question is, well, how often do they get a warrant, execute it, and not charge anybody with anything? That would be an interesting thing to know. But of course, we never hear about the ones that don't get charged because they don't come to hire a lawyer.
Okay.
So what we do see, though, is there's a fairly routinely, they won't, when they seize the computers and search them, they won't find the files that they say that they swore they were there when they got their warrant. Okay. And there's maybe a couple explanations for that. One would be maybe the tool doesn't work right all the time, and it sometimes thinks something's there and it's not. Okay. Another, and I say that I just can't rule it out. Sure. It might be, it might not be. But another one is the way they do their investigations typically is they'll do them in batches. They'll prowl around the internet for a month or so and collect a whole bunch of things, and then send the ISPs a big batch of subpoenas and say, like, we want the subscriber information for these 6 people or these 10 people. Okay. They don't do them just one at a time on the day when they get the information. They bundle them up, probably just because it's a simpler workflow for them or something. But as a result, it might be months between the time when the investigators got their single source download and the time when they go get a warrant. And so the files are just not there anymore.
Interesting.
People have gotten rid of them.
Interesting. A couple questions about the client. So you said these are modified versions of the client. How does that get onto the person's computer in the first place?
It doesn't. It sits on the law enforcement officer's computer. Okay. The person is running just regular old BitTorrent or Nutella or whatever, and they're participating in the peer-to-peer network, and they're just running the regular microtorrents or whatever piece of software they like. But law enforcement is running its special thing, that when it connects to them to look at what they're doing, it can gather some extra information.
I see, that makes sense. And is there any way to detect whenever that type, because you had said it earlier, if there was a way to detect it, you could just kill the connection, but it doesn't sound like there's any way to detect that.
Well, we don't know the way to detect it. We suspect there might be. Okay. So a truly enterprising person who is fearless might themselves build their own fake peer-to-peer client, put it someplace nowhere near their house, like out on Amazon or something, and see what connects to it. Just log connections and capture packets and observe and see if you can distinguish. Well, this one seems like garden variety BitTorrent. This one, there was a little something funny when it connected.
Interesting.
That might be that's a risk taker's game, but you could you could do it. And so you might figure it out then.
Is there any privileged information that you couldn't share at the top?
Well, I didn't share information about any individual cases. That would fall under attorney-client privilege, and I couldn't do that. I'm not privy to anything that I know to be restricted as in like a classified sort of information. It's possible that some of the stuff that some of my inferences are right, and that information might be protected somehow, but I don't know that. Okay.
What were some of your findings that surprised you during this investigation?
Well, it's more frustrating. I've spent a lot of time helping attorneys draft motions and helping them brief the issue of why they should be able to get access to this stuff, because it's, in my view, basically our criminal justice system, one of the big features that makes it trustworthy and makes it so that we will accept it is transparency, and you're allowed to see the evidence that's presented against you, and you're allowed to question it, and that's what trials are for. But here, there's this part that's being sort of cordoned off and said, no, you don't need to look at this, just trust us, we're the government, I'm sure it's fine. That has been I've been surprised at how tenaciously that battle is fought by the government.
Any lessons learned from this kind of investigation?
Well, I think, yes, one is that slow and steady, you make progress. Every case I'm on, I know a little bit more than I did on the last one. Really? And I meet other attorneys, and there's a lot of people who are interested in this. And I think what we're looking for is probably a couple of cases that really put a fine point on it, where it's really, okay, but for this piece of information, there would be no case, and there's something irregular about it, so it's worth investigating, and the defendant just has the right to do that. So I think, every time we take a little chip off the block, and sooner or later we're going to get to the point where we'll get access to something, I hope.
Are you releasing your methodology for your research?
Well, my methodology is like looking at pieces of paper. It's not really, it's nothing that sophisticated. If I were to build the phony tool, that would be something to really release. Okay. Really, all this is I work on, at any one time I'm in about 3 or 4 of these cases, and I read the warrants and I kind of collate them, and I look for discrepancies, or I look for changes in terminology. So it used to be that, for example, that they would name the tool and they would say, we used Roundup. That's one of the pieces of software. Okay. And you can Google Roundup and find out some good information about it. Now they don't name the tools anymore. They say it's an undercover investigative software, which they then abbreviate to UIS because they're just crazy about abbreviations. Okay. But so the UIS detected this, and so it's like kind of in a way I think even more abstract and scary and shadowy. But so that's one change that they've made. And they no longer talk about tagging in the warrant affidavits that I see, but I can't imagine that they removed that feature from the software. It's probably still there.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of an arms race because they know that we're catching on to things. Sure. They know we're closely reading these documents. But that's really all I'm doing is looking at them and seeing what kind of a picture I can put together. Because there's you get a little tidbit here and a little tidbit there. Yeah. Synthesize.
Most of the DEF CON talks are like an arms race between either a piece of machinery, a piece of software. Yes, that's really interesting. So what are the most useful open source tools, if you used any, during your investigation? Did you use any? Like
I said, it was really a document-based review. I did, I have, I guess, downloaded and installed some of the the peer-to-peer clients just to see what they look like, etc. But there wasn't really much software
special about it. So you were just using the normal off-the-shelf peer-to-peer clients.
And I wouldn't say I even used it. I just inspected it or something.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. How can average people protect themselves? Is there a way?
Well, one really good thing would be don't trade contraband on peer-to-peer networks. Don't do crimes. That would be a really good
That'll get you off the radar, right?
Yeah. But if you're going to do that sort of thing, yes, there are tools that could protect you. Tor would be a wonderful tool for that. I mean, it's painful and obnoxious probably to trade large files via Tor, but it could be done, and that would mask your IP address.
Okay. And was Tor included in any of these investigations? You're talking.
No.
I was under the assumption that these people were using Tor.
Well, the smart ones are, and they're not the ones who run across my desk.
I see.
Mostly we're talking about folks who heard, oh wait, I can just get whatever I want if I install this client, and they do that.
I see.
And so yeah, Tor for communications, something like CCleaner to wipe your Slack space once you've deleted files, because they can recover, they'll recover deleted files, and just sort of general good privacy tools would be the way to go.
Okay. A little bit about what inspired you to do this talk. I think you said it was out of frustration. Is that the only thing?
That was one thing. This is my 4th time talking at DEF CON, and I always, the last couple talks I've given have been, I would consider them not, the first 2 I released tools and it was all kinds of, to me, impressive technical stuff. that was back when I was working full-time in IT security. I'm a lawyer now.
Okay.
So I think the better place for me now is to deliver these sort of footnote talks that have a little pithy piece of information and maybe inspire someone else to dig into this or to examine it. I also do it for networking. I've met some good people as a result of this talk. People who I'll continue to communicate with when I get back to the real world.
Yeah.
But yeah, the inspiration for it was frustration, and I also just think it's kind of a weird thing. There's this. On the one hand, they say, oh, there's nothing terribly secretive about this. Anyone could do this if they wanted, but we won't show you what we did. And that's frustrating, and it I think is. I think it has consequences for justice, because what we're really talking about here is trading child porn, and that's a terrible crime. It's not good, and we don't like the people who did that. And I have no problem with the idea of them getting prosecuted. All of that is fine, but the problem is rules are getting made that will apply to everyone. And if the government is allowed to sort of increasingly get searchy on people's home computers without warrants, that's bad for everyone. And so there's a lot of bad Fourth Amendment law being made right now as a result of this. And I want to call attention to that.
As a lawyer, yeah, of course. So let's talk about DEF CON a little bit. You said you've done 5 talks here.
No, this is my 4th, actually.
4th talk, wow. Okay, what's your favorite part about DEF CON?
Well, it used to be, I've been a fan of hacker culture since I didn't know about DEF CON when there was DEF CON 1, but about that time.
Yeah.
And an active participant in it for many years. And I used to just get jazzed just about the whole idea of coming to DEF CON. That was just like Christmas to me.
Right.
Now it's more, I've come enough that it's the chance to see people who I only ever see at DEF CON.
Yeah.
And so I've got a circle of folks that I don't get to see the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And that's really great. And I always, I get jaded, and everybody says, oh, the talks, you just watch them online later, and so don't just socialize or whatever. But I always find there's good stuff. I've been to a bunch of great talks this year and really enjoyed it. I always come away with new ideas and just sort of awe at the talent that some folks have.
Oh, it's amazing. Is there any advice you would give to people that haven't done a talk at DEF CON, things you've learned along the way?
A couple of things. One is the more specific and more detailed you can be on your outline, the better chance you have of being accepted. The other piece of advice that I would have is just do it. It's not that hard to fill out the call for papers form. You should do it. And getting selected as a speaker, it's not a vastly different experience at the con, but it's somewhat different. And you get to meet people in a way you wouldn't otherwise necessarily. You get maybe to get invited to a couple of things you wouldn't otherwise. It's a blast, really. So yeah, people should do it. But yeah, be organized and as detailed as possible as you can in the outline that you give of your presentation, and try, if you can. I mean, they tell you up front there are certain things that increase your chances. If you've got a tool that you're releasing, or if you're going to do a demo or something impressive, that'll help. Not everybody is going to be able to do that. Not everybody's got the next Nmap or whatever to show.
Yeah.
But if you can make the talk have a hook, something interesting, whether it's a policy point or a technical area that's sort of in the air that people are talking about, that'll help too. I think. I mean, of course, it's not official advice, but it's worked for me.
Well, where can people find more information about your research and the past talks you've done?
There's a lot of stuff on foofus.net. That's foofus.net. That's our little security site. It's in the archives of DEF CON. I've spoken at TourCon a couple of times and the Usenix Lisa conference, and so just Googling either my real name or Foofus will lead you to a bunch of stuff. There is a potential for confusion. There is a foofus.com. I'm not that guy. He's a really nice guy, but that's a different person.
Awesome. And we'll have all the links that he just mentioned in the description below. If Foofus's research has inspired you, let us know down in the comments. Until next time, this is Troy with Hacker Warehouse coming from DEF CON 25. Thanks so much, Foofus.
Thanks.
All right.